One reason that we as founders get advisors like yourself is because you've already likely seen situations that, if they're not exactly the same, are roughly similar to something that we haven't experienced yet.
AI has kind of shifted business models. Like it's kind of away from SaaS. It's away from SaaS pricing. It's away from SaaS type methodology. It can be deployed differently. It can be provided differently. And so I think AI is creating a few different models, not just around pricing, but also delivery. You've seen a lot of the big AI companies. Guess what they started as? Bitcoin miners.
Where do you get your leading edge information? Is it from people? Is it from books? How are you sourcing the right information to stay ahead of the curve? Welcome back to another episode of Hosting Bitcoin, where we explore the builders, thinkers, and the rebels shaping the future of freedom, money, and the digital world. Today's guest is Dean Sutton, who is a Canadian entrepreneur, investor, and our first advisor who's been advising us at Abundant Minds since early on in the company's growth. He's the co-founder of Liquid Technologies, the co-founder of WonderFi, the largest Canadian digital assets exchange, a founding strategic advisor to Argo Blockchain, and the founder of General Intelligence. Dean is a rare breed. He's somebody who understands the code, the culture, the vision, and the risk. And whether he's building technology, launching companies, or advising others that do the same, Dean brings a kind of clarity to complexity that helps people make the impact that they're here to make. And today, we're diving into the future of infrastructure, the path to building public companies, and companies that matter, and what it means to play the long game in a space that's built sometimes only with the mindset of speed. Dean, we are honored to have you on. Welcome to Hosting Bitcoin.
Thank you for having me.
So we met now about a year ago. You came into my world, started working with me. We have been going back and forth a lot. You were our first advisor at Abundant Minds, and I would love to unpack the story that got you here. And specifically, you've had a wide range of experiences in and around the Bitcoin space in pretty much every aspect of it. So I'll just let you take it, but I would love to know, how did you first get into the Bitcoin space in general?
Yeah, and a quick note on how we met. I think that's cool because we met in a business group, and it's like, I think I said this to you when I first met you. It's like a Bitcoiner can spot another Bitcoiner from afar. And that's why, like, right away we cut right through it. I'm like, hey, we had a chat, and I've enjoyed every interaction since. But yeah, my story is not, I feel like I was even late, but everyone has a unique story and like that unique time of discovery. But I would say that it was around 2016, but I feel like I was stubborn at the time where I learned it. I got a little bit, it definitely resonated, but then I didn't like go level 2 as quick as I should have. So I kind of like got into it, toe in the water, and then just like, trickled in where I really wish that I paused a little bit more, got a little bit more serious and did like some real kind of deep dive analysis. But I got it on the main principles right away, and just like, I knew it was my thing. But it wasn't like the main thing at the time. So I got into that, and maybe in retrospect, that was probably only a year or so. I was toying around at the time, trying to figure out some stuff and learning how mining works, and lost a bunch like everybody does. So I learned the painful way in many ways. But I always knew right away that it was like, it's one of these things that's different from everything else. Like it really resonated with what it is as sound money. And I liked it as much where I got out of what I was doing commercially, like from a founder perspective. And I kind of, in 2017, actually, I formally started a company that was focused on both building and investing in the space. So we had a little mining operation in British Columbia, and we were basically building and investing in stuff ourselves. So we were trying to build some stuff around payments. We were investing in some companies, and I was doing some advisory. That was in that unique era where, we raised some money. We're in Canada where there's absolutely no venture capital ecosystem. So for better or for worse, we tend to use public markets, I call it like public venture capital, as a means to get access to capital so that we can build, a venture business with remote kind of capability that would mirror like the United States. So we have enough resources to build and commercialize something. So I leaned into the public markets for that one. That's where we raised the capital. For better or for worse, it was in that time where, we built for about a year, and then 2018, this there was that first onslaught of publicly traded Bitcoin miners, if you recall back then. And it was like a wow moment, everyone's enjoying that ride of this fresh new industry that was changing lives. And then, there was that pullback. And we were about to list the company right when that pullback happened. So our lovely friends that were in the public markets decided, hey, you know what? We don't want to do another public listing because there's this pullback. Of course, we see right through it, and we wanted to keep going. We kind of had a disagreement, so we basically, to put it mildly, we kind of like dissolved and went our own separate ways at that point. And then I spent the next kind of 3 to 4 years effectively rebuilding every company and project we had inside of that company as individual kind of standalone companies.
So after that, you were co-founder of Liquid, so it's a Lightning infrastructure company. You're co-founder of WonderFi, which is the largest Canadian digital assets exchange. You were founding strategic advisor to Argo, which coincidentally was the company that I modeled our first business plan off because they were mostly sustainable or highly sustainable.
Yeah.
What was the through line that got you into all of those different ventures, and what interested you about being in each one of those? 'Cause that's essentially every part of the ecosystem.
Yeah. Yeah, it was funny. I guess to touch on like how we got into different pieces. So when I was developing a thesis, it was called Block Tech Ventures originally, is what we were doing that original venture company in 2017. Like anyone else, we didn't have all the answers. We just knew that Bitcoin was a thing, and this, blockchain technology was going to enable a lot of people to build some really cool stuff with. So when we did that, we had a part where we were investing in founders and projects, but we are also building our own stuff. So some of the stuff that we were looking at doing was around payments and using, blockchain as a rail, so to speak, to create different mechanisms of payments. We had people that were creating almost like these like index funds. There was tokenization became a thing. So tokenization of real world assets became a thing. Turns out we were far too early on that, of course. But there was a few different things that we were doing. So that diversity was when I left, I looked at what's the best mechanism of payments as an example was, well, if you look at Bitcoin of what it is, why not create, the fundamental payment rail being built on Bitcoin using the Lightning Network? So that, what we're trying to create originally in my first company, with those nice scars in our back from those lessons learned, when we reformed that same thesis, it was, let's do it on Bitcoin. Lightning Network is the way to do it. What's our approach? Well, let's form a company that can create nodes and channels, provide liquidity, and just map payments and make it easier to use. Because in that era, I mean, it's still kind of a thing, but like the onboarding and tools for people to get into this stuff is still quite challenging. It's not as user friendly. So that was kind of the thesis originally around creating Liquid, and I was a co-founder there with two other really really smart guys, and I ended up having to leave that company. We'll kind of like go back into this like somewhat logical flow of stuff, but I had to leave the company. It wasn't ideal, but I was building another company at the time, so that turned out to be DeFi Ventures turned into WonderFi. So I did that with a couple co-founders, and we had a very time-sensitive, large financing round that was contingent on me at the time, so I had to step away. But what I will say with Liquid is I still believe that it's a great business. It's still the first, to my knowledge, it's the only publicly traded proxy to get access to that space, which I think a lot of people wanted to get access to. But Sean and the team there have done a great job. They, using the public markets allows you to put Bitcoin on the balance sheet, which was a big part of the strategy. They've continued to execute on that and do quite a good job there. And before all that, the Argo stuff was cool because it was, putting my shingle out there in starting my company in 2017, the first one. People know that you're at the first events and you're speaking at those events, and that's how people kind of just knew that you're in the space. So when the guys behind Argo were putting it together, they just kind of gave me a call and said, "Hey, we're gonna do this. We're in London. We've raised this amount of capital. We're going to take a meaningful go at this." And it was mainly around like being in the industry. There wasn't too many people. So it was, help connect them to people and like the concepts around it, finding a facility that has the right power and the right pricing. And that was kind of it at the end of the day, was that early kind of inception conversations. And they did a good job too, and I think that's, I don't know all the details of that story later on. I was much more on the front end of it, but it's kind of interesting because I know they tried a few different business models. They tried to create like the Netflix subscription model for mining, where anyone could just contribute a few, a few dollars or pounds, and then they could just earn that on a monthly. And then, they moved away from that, and every company has its ups and downs and challenges. But at the end of the day, it was the first publicly traded Bitcoin miner in London, which was, another interesting thing to see. And the same thing with Liquid. It's one of those things where it's never easy, and you get a lot of, maybe even criticism or, scars on your back from learning in real time. But at the end of the day, that whole kind of era for me was building these companies and bringing them to public markets and being first in this space. It's not fun nor easy, but it was definitely kind of pioneering, trying to get, Bitcoin and Bitcoin companies front and center, publicly traded, saying this is a thing. And I still know people that say, it's not, but I just chuckle. But it was, that was kind of the main thing at the end of the day, was let's try to bring these things mainstream, doing what we think we can do to, kind of help bring them to the next level.
What are the pitfalls of being in the public markets? Because that's something that we've talked about a few times, and is not necessarily something I'm looking for, especially in the near term, but
Yeah.
you've got a ton of experience with, and have quite a few stories of why it works, in some cases why it doesn't work. Like what is
Yeah.
it about the public markets that's different?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, and I'll keep it with like an optimistic tone. Like there's it's not easy thing to do by any means. Like I wouldn't recommend, public markets. I would say, to be frank, in Canada is kind of a necessity if you want to build a venture company and move quickly. That's, unless you raise internationally, like it's basically the only way to form capital and an opportunity big enough to move fast enough to even remotely compete with an industry. So in Canada, it's kind of like almost a necessity if you want to do something big and fast in some ways. It's not the only way, but at the time it was the best way to form capital. So when you do that though, obviously you've got all of the regulations, you've got filings, you've got compliance, you've got shareholders, you got communications, you've got constant criticism, you got constant disclosures, constant accountability of like upwards and to the right. So it's not, it's not for the faint of heart. It's not an easy thing to do. It can be good. And like the general thesis for us when you're using public markets is, if you have, it doesn't work for every company, but if you have, a business or an industry where you kind of apply your logic and your business to a specific vertical, you can use if done correctly, you can use your stock as currency to, incentivize and roll up, similar or complementary companies to have both an organic and an inorganic growth strategy. So you can build your core business line, raise capital, resource that, incentivize your team in a really good way through, options and things that they can see material value. So you can create cultural alignment. You can give investors access or exposure to something that they otherwise just can't get access to. So we call them like access products. And then from the other side, it's like, in addition to your core business line and your incentivized team building your business, you now have a marketable security. You have a value to these shares that, in the right context, you can potentially find other companies or founders out there that you can buy with a combination of cash and shares. Sometimes it's like all shares, and that way you can kind of pick off things that as a private company you just don't have those tools in your tool belt, so to speak. So it can allow you, if done the right way, it can allow you to grow pretty quickly. It can allow you to acquire complementary companies or revenue. And it's basically a growth mechanism is kind of like the logic of how we looked at it.
And what kept you coming back to mining in particular? Because this seems to be a theme running through, even in your current business, of this connection to energy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think what it always comes back to for me, to be honest, it comes back to Bitcoin. And mining is Bitcoin. And then if you go back to, okay, well, you like mining or you like Bitcoin, so mining's the way to produce Bitcoin, then, the fundamental underlying principles of that, go back to energy. And so that's kind of why this whole thing kind of continues to go. And I think like when I met you, like I think I told you like right when I met you, it's like, this is just a space I love. I'm always going to love it. I'm always going to, be a part of it, invest in it, support in it, do whatever I can to, foster it and help it grow. It's just a space that I've always enjoyed for some reason. Like the sound of ASIC miners, these dirty industrial muddy lots that have these containers, and then there's these over advanced engineered facilities that have like a few things. Like I've enjoyed the array of different approaches to it. But I think it's just because what Bitcoin is and what it stands for. I just love that it's created in the way that it is. So I've just always supported miners and companies, and that's why I like yourself and a few others. I just people that are building it. I also know that it's not an easy space to be in by any means. It's it has to be done in a very specific way. There's a great reward if you do it the right way, but I know, I guess I have an appreciation for how hard it is. So when I meet people like you and others in the space, it's like, how can I help? What can I connect you to? I love the space. I want to support wherever I can, basically.
You touched on it a little bit, but I want to go a little bit deeper on it. This is a hard space to be in. There's a lot of opportunity, but it can also be very frustrating, very competitive. What is it about the mission of mining that aligns with you personally? Like what is Dean Sutton trying to accomplish in his life on this earth that itch is scratched by being involved in Bitcoin mining?
Good question. I think it's the purity of what Bitcoin is to me, at least in my head. Like it's such a pure and simple and valuable thing. Like people say money makes the world go round. Like I look at money as, fun coupons, freedom units, the ability to help, the ability to solve problems. So to me, when you look at what was created in recent history in the form of Bitcoin that allows you to, I look at it personally, the way I look at it as an asset. It's like, I think it's very important to invest in real estate or own your home. But, I was talking to my neighbor the other day who, heard a little bit about what I did through the grapevine, I guess. He's asking me about it. And, I'm just politely just mentioning a few things and not giving advice, but just saying what I do. And we got into the conversation of like the homes and stuff like that. And to me, it's pure and it's simple. There's a set amount. It is what it is. It's unlike anything else from the property standpoint. Like look at your home. I think it's super important to own your home. I look at that the same way, but property taxes, there's contingencies there. Do you really own it at the end of the day? Stocks, bonds, other financial instruments, equities, index funds, you look at those and then you look at other properties versus, what Bitcoin, like you can take it anywhere, spend it on anything, provide it to anyone, anywhere, anyhow. It just has fundamental different purposes, but it's all tied back to that, inherent simple property of being money. And I've liked the simplicity of it. And I think it's beautiful to have that simplicity of money and what it can do for people and how it's different from the traditional investments in money. I'm not a big fan of how dollars are being printed and melting away all over the planet. So I look at that as it's different. And I like that simplicity of it. And then, of course, anything that is worth something, there's some complexity involved in creating it. And then that challenge of doing that right is almost like it's a beautiful part of the simplicity of it, where you got to get into the sticks and the mud and energy and transformers and, pricing. And then you got supply chains and you got hardware and you have to get, financing for, the CapEx for this stuff. And there's a lot of things that I think need to line up right to do the hard work to make this beautiful, simple thing possible. So I just look at it like the engine, and then there's that simple kind of pure thing of what Bitcoin is. And I've just always liked that. It's that beautiful blend of like simplicity and value and complexity that it just doesn't seem boring to me. It's always a challenge.
More recently, you've made, I don't know if you'd call it a pivot, but you've grown into the AI space. So your newest company, General Intelligence, how are you thinking about, because this is always a hot button topic for miners, is are you pivoting some of your capacity to AI? These are both very compute intensive processes, but super different as well. What got you into what you're working on currently, and how do you balance that with still putting focus into the Bitcoin space, companies like ours?
Yeah. Yeah. When I left WonderFi, like the quick shtick with that, which is funny, is I looked at Wonder if I started as DeFi Ventures, which is it was obviously decentralized finance. The pure and simple 3 seconds on that was when that kind of technology came on the scene. I looked at that and said, my God, this is an interesting moment in time where any individual, anywhere on the planet, can own and have custody of their assets and earn assets within their control and their custody that beats the bank and send it anywhere. And I was like, this is a significant moment that technology finally does something that, you know, is beats the banks literally and figuratively. And I thought that technology, not so much in North America, because we have so many options with like sending money and, we have no shortage of apps, right? But it was mostly in the emerging, world and areas that I just like, this is a huge impact on humanity. This technology finally can do something fundamentally interesting around money that can impact so many people. That was the original reason why we started DeFi Ventures. And then, that market timing in 2021 was incredibly hot. And we changed the name to WonderFi. And then once we got listed, publicly traded company doing decentralized finance as a regulated entity, there's some challenges within that. And then we moved to what I kind of alluded to before, which is using the public vehicle to acquire a number of Canadian regulated exchanges. And we did that, in succession. And then I left. And again, the team has done an incredible job with that company. I still watch it. I'm still a big fan of that today. And after you acquire a certain amount of companies, every company has human beings that run it. And every time you acquire a company, it comes with inherent challenges of like integrations and people. Like that, the real work begins when you're done doing the integration. But anyways, fast forward, when I left that, I asked that similar question, which is, what do I like and believe in enough to get out of bed and get back to war building a company? Building from zero is a pretty it's a challenging endeavor. It's not for the faint of heart. It takes a lot of work to build something from zero. And when I left, I just looked at, where's the world at today, and what's something that's changing the world. So, a few years ago, I thought it was blockchain technology, DeFi, and Bitcoin, obviously. And then when I left, the only kind of new thing that emerged on the scene was this kind of Cambrian explosion moment. And, when OpenAI came out with ChatGPT, suddenly it's on everybody's lips. And we just looked at that and said, okay, I'm a simple guy. I've got a very simple brain. I'm like, this technology like Bitcoin is not going back into the bottle. And it's going to, we don't know how, and it's going to be complex. And it'll probably have that initial spike and a pullback, and then it will gain some traction. But like anything else, it's going to have a dramatic impact on the future of work, full stop, on every person, how they work, their business, and their industry. And I said, that is enough of a shift to know it's just going to have enough of an impact that let's form a company that basically provides tools and infrastructure to make it easier for small businesses that aren't going to pay Palantir and these big companies massive amounts of money, but small businesses, the tools and infrastructure to do it securely. So you're not literally training someone else's model. You're owning your own stuff, building your own stuff that ultimately at the end of the day allows you to leverage AI, adopt it securely, but build your own kind of workflows and solutions that you can trace back to your own time and team, what they actually do for your business, make it much more pragmatic and give them control of these things. So getting into that was basically saying the only next trend I see here is AI. And so we jumped into it. And then drawing back to that correlation that you said, it's very close in many ways to Bitcoin mining, right? You've seen a lot of the big AI companies, guess what they started as? Bitcoin miners. And you see some companies trying to straddle both, right? Which is super interesting because you've got this somewhat known, predictable base load of mining Bitcoin. And then people are saying, and then we're going to add, high performance compute and AI on top of that, which is cool. But again, extensive CapEx required, a lot of specialty. We're still fairly early in the industry. There's monoliths that are obviously fighting for this space. You've got to have some differentiation, some value. And there's, inference versus training. There's a lot of different things. But at the end of the day, I do think that I'm seeing a lot of really cool examples where Bitcoin miners do have this adjacent step towards it. If it's done right, people are doing distributed inference, people are doing general inference, people are doing dedicated training, people are using it separately for just like confidential computing and just all the high performance compute needs. But yeah, I'd say I got into it because that was the next wave of something I thought and believed in. I thought I'd give it a shot and try to build some value there. And I like that there's there's a correlation to Bitcoin mining, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on it too, because a lot of companies that are in the mining space like yourself, they know it's a thing, but the question really becomes, what is our approach to it and how can we pragmatically do it, making sure that if we're going to invest in this infrastructure, we're directly connected to the demand side of that market, so we don't just sit on a whole bunch of very, very, very expensive paperweights.
Yeah, and there's a lot of similarities, but in many ways, the only really true similarity is that they both use energy and they both require internet access. Like they both require some sort of a data center, even if those data centers look very different in terms of how they're constructed, how they're run, what kind of team is needed. Like they really are completely different businesses. And I think in the mining space, you've got all these different models, right? You've got colocation providers that are essentially just like a white label customer service experience, and they're leasing data center space from somebody else. They're not doing any of their own work. All the way down to people who own their own energy generation, data centers, miners, the full stack. So there's like an industry parallel, let's say, and then there's also different layers in each one of those industries that you can choose to be a part of. And a conversation that I heard recently, I won't try to regurgitate all the levels, but there were like 5 different levels of infrastructure that you could choose to focus on in the AI space, with the lowest being the actual energy, the data center, and the highest being the application. So the actual thing that gets done for someone. And somewhere in the middle is the model, specialized agents, whatever it may be. And the whole framing of the conversation was where is the moat? And I think that's a
Mm-hmm.
question that miners ask themselves often, and we ask ourselves often as well, is where can I build that I'm not going to be easily disrupted? And
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to hear in either mining or in the more general intelligence space, where is the moat that you see that you can actually differentiate yourself and not get out competed by one of the huge companies that's infinite funded?
Yeah, and you're talking about not be able competed by like providing that service to like the end users.
Yeah, so like one example would be if you have a very specialized service that's like an end product sold to, say, like legal professionals or doctors, it's
Mm-hmm.
going to be very challenging to stand up the infrastructure to serve that market with all of its high compliance requirements
Yeah.
just by building an additional product, let's say. Whereas a large language model, you could train a new model every couple of weeks, and it seems like depending on what week it is, someone's is coming out as the most intelligent, the most widely used and resourced, and it seems to change all the time. So I don't see a clear moat in the model
Yeah.
themselves.
No, I think it's a really good question. I think the way I look at it is that I think all of the models, it's basically moving to a point where small models matter. The large models are largely a commodity. That's owned by the big boys and the monoliths. Like, let them do it. Like the people that are the large companies in the world are going to create and continue to create like incredible and powerful models. There's a massive shift for like open source models and stuff. And when you look at it, there's like the application layer, and then there's more like the infrastructure and like model side of things. And when we look at it, like that similar question, like how do you create a moat in differentiation? Like for what we did as an example is, models are the commodity. We provide infrastructure. We're not selling it as a SaaS, but if you're, a law firm or someone that's in finance, you're privacy conscious or whatever, we build infrastructure and we just kind of give it to you. We say, this is yours. You self-host it. You run it. Now you can leverage these commodity models that are frozen, protecting you. We'll completely just, interchange them based on constant stream of innovation and new models. And you focus on the simple things that matter, because people are saying, you know, you can Google any industry and say AI for X, and there's like 50,000 startups built in a basement. And I love to see that innovation side of it. But at the end of the day, I think value is created in a moat is created in creating simple and accessible value to people that need it. And there's a lot of over tooling and over productization for what small businesses really need. Like they just want to help solve one identifiable workflow that saves them, a few $100,000 a year, get it under their feet, get that security, get that base, and then build from there again. So On one hand, it's like you can build a moat by raising hundreds of millions of dollars and creating a new model and something very, very, you know, very large and very valuable. And our small version is like focus on being valuable, give companies what they need and what they want. Don't kind of oversell them, meet them where they are, but give them control and access and ownership of it so they can learn it, get value from it, but then have a long tail of building value over time that will shift their business and, allow them to be an innovator. So we give them kind of like the tools and picks and shovels, and we're just kind of like a provider, but mainly just a partner. We'll just constantly ship over the stuff that helps you do what you do and, not be in your business as much, except when you want some help or you want some advice building things out, or we ship you a new feature. And I think the other side of it is how do you create a moat on, if models, and this is my opinion, there's so many other people in this space that are orders of magnitude smarter than me. I'm like the dummy in the room. I always surround myself with people that are much smarter that could speak to this much better than I could. But in this world where there's a lot of models and models can be somewhat commoditized, most businesses don't really care about switching between 15 different models. They want to pick one that's really good for that general purpose, and they want to focus on that end workflow that they can attribute back to time and cost. And so if you're on the compute side of it, I think there's a lot of value around, pre-configured, workflows and containers. So if you're that provider where you have source energy and you've got some compute capacity, just the moat is in pre-packaging and creating the tools that allow those people to just like deploy and ship and run. They don't necessarily want to worry about, the long tail. I think it's going to be a lot of as needed on demand type stuff that I think is valuable. But I think moats right now, AI has kind of shifted business models. Like it's kind of away from SaaS. It's away from SaaS pricing. It's away from SaaS type methodology. It can be deployed differently. It can be provided differently. And so I think AI is creating a few different models, not just around pricing, but also delivery. So, providing it and self-hosting is just one option of many. And I'm seeing a lot of very smart compute providers. They're doing the upfront work to create value in like pre-configuring a lot of workloads that allow you to do, specific training or specific deployments. And then you just kind of run that compute for them. So it's, again, they control it. They have a lot of value. Your moat is just serving that because it's going to be impervious everywhere. And I think people that try to have that whole kind of supply chain of everything and maintain vendor lock, I think that's a bit of a harder approach.
Have you ever felt like you've done everything right, built the business, made smart investments, and yet there's still one piece missing? If you're someone who believes in Bitcoin but hasn't yet explored mining, let me introduce you to something that most people never even realize exists, and that is fully managed Bitcoin mining with Abundant Mines. We help high net worth individuals like you own industrial grade mining infrastructure without ever touching the machines. It's hands-free, professionally hosted, and designed to generate passive income by turning electricity into Bitcoin every single day. It's tax advantaged, it's asset backed, and for many of our clients, it's become one of the smartest moves that they've ever made in their investing career. So if you're ready to take the next step into real Bitcoin ownership, not just holding, but producing it at a discount, visit abundantmines.com. That's abundantmines.com, and see why this strategy is changing the game for serious investors. One reason that we as founders get advisors like yourself is because you've already likely seen situations that, if they're not exactly the same, are roughly similar to something that we haven't experienced yet. And I would be really curious to hear, what are some of the most painful lessons that you've had to learn that have ended up paying back in terms of saving people like me and others that you help along the entrepreneurial journey not make the same mistakes you did? Because it's often those really painful experiences that end up paying us back the most on the long tail.
Yeah, one that's top of mind, I think we've talked about it, is I definitely put a lot of weight and emphasis on, founders that are raising capital in a venture that, it's going to be venture scale or just requires it for their growth. I'm very kind of cautious and thoughtful around what type of alignment those founders and those companies can create with the partners that they're going to find that can provide that capital. the majority of the most painful scenarios I've encountered and I've seen in friends and other founders that are doing the same thing is raising capital from a source, pushing speed, less of an emphasis on alignment, and actually really caring honestly what that business is doing, being aligned with the vision of it and the timeline, and just making sure that you've got the right capital partners, because you find out very, very quickly into your journey if you have a misalignment there. It can definitely disrupt things in a very negative way. So it's kind of like those main things is ensuring you got alignment with capital if that's the direction you're going. I see a trend away from raising so much capital and doing more bootstrapped, depending on the industry, not so much capital intensive, but that's one trend I think is a positive one. And I'd say the other one is largely around who you surround yourself with. It's that age old thing. It's your team. Is your team aligned? What are they there for? Are they there because they just want to build something and there's a very near term, like, bang the drum, kind of turn a dollar around? Or, do they really have a little bit of movement and passion around what you're doing? Like that's definitely a skills versus passion conversation. But I'd say it's just who you raise capital with and who you go to war with is two of the most significant, important things that any founder is going to encounter, I think.
We met in the same group, so we clearly pick our groups in a similar way. How do you think about who you surround yourself with, what rooms you want to be in? What do you do differently to be surrounded by the right people?
These days, I just got to stop being such a hermit. That's one thing. And get out more. I stopped attending events and doing stuff so much. I need to get back to that. So just one thing, hence the group that I met you in, which is great. But I would say, yeah, it's one of those things where I used to always think too much about it. So who am I going into this, and what shirt am I wearing, and how am I presenting myself? And I worry a lot about those things. And what I found is the best is just be yourself and be 100% authentic with who you are, what you're doing, why you're doing it, and then be in the right space with that true aligned message. Don't just try to put on a suit jacket and be somebody. Be yourself and do what you're doing, and then be in the right rooms, hopefully of people smarter than you. And then generally you'll find people that just kind of resonate with your message and what you're doing. I guess it's more like earlier when I was younger, everyone starts somewhere. So when I was starting out, I remember I'd go to these like business cocktail events or whatever, and I'd feel like such a fish out of water. You got this, suit jacket you buy at Moore's, and you're like, this doesn't fit. And, but you're there because everyone wears suit jackets at these business events. So you do the thing. And I laugh because I was like 20 when I was doing those things, but I look at that versus now where I just remember being uncomfortable, but I'm there for the right reasons. I'm building, but I had to be somebody to just feel like I had to, get into these rooms and have conversations. And I think now more than ever, and even when I meet other founders, it's just people that are on a mission doing something meaningful, but you can just see in their eyes that they have conviction. They're authentic to who they are. They're not just trying to, pose and be somebody, but you can see that authenticity in them. You know that they're not going to give up. They're here for the right reasons. And then by kind of giving yourself permission to just be your real self, you're not kind of putting on an act for the business crowd. I think that's cool because then the right people find you. But I just try to be in rooms with people smarter than me. Every business and venture I've ever started I would say it's because I had the opportunity to partner up with people that are smarter than me and much more talented in many ways. I've had technical people in every business that definitely comes with that, very technical nature. And maybe I can do the formation of team, tech, and capital. But at the end of the day, it's just surrounding myself with people that have a lot of drive and we're aligned on a mission, but they're generally smarter than me. And I think that's been the focus, at least so far.
The most successful people that I know are and consider themselves to be lifelong learners. Mm-hmm. And I am curious, for you, you've been on essentially the leading edge of several different things at the right times. And that means that in most cases, there's not a lot of peer-reviewed studies citing exactly how to succeed in X venture. Where do you get your leading edge information? Is it from people? Is it from books? Is GPT your therapist and advisor? Like, how are you sourcing the right information to stay ahead of the curve?
up and until, and even with the last one, AI wasn't as prevalent in being useful for that stuff. And I haven't been asked that before. I would like to imagine that it's because I try to just envision like a better way or a better world or how technology can do something new or better. And so that's just where my kind of bias goes, is like what's going to change and what's going to come, and then what will that mean? And if I can figure out and at least paint a picture in my head of this emerging technology that could very well fail or it could very well turn into this, then what would that mean in that scenario? And if that scenario was true, what could and should one build around it to further enable it or make it easier or make it more accessible? And that's just, I guess, been how my mind naturally works and gravitates. But I could look back and say, yeah, I built a couple companies or whatever. There's lots of failures in between and many before them. But at the end of the day, it's also not easy on like the frontier side of things. Like I say, I've had my ass kicked more than I've had days, standing on a mountaintop for sure. So being on the frontier side is like, it's super painful and it's lonely. And there's also these moments, and I would say extended moments of time, where if you don't have significant conviction and belief in what you're doing, sometimes there's a long lag between here's what we're going to do and then here's how long it's going to take to get support or traction. And sometimes that timeline is so painfully long that if you have unwavering conviction or belief, it's like, it'll just take you out. Like it's not easy being on the frontier, because a lot of these technologies take time. And like even that first venture that I mentioned, like I had more conviction and belief in, what's going on with blockchain and Bitcoin and stuff in 2017. But, my hardest semi truck to the face came in 2019 when that whole thing came to an abrupt end. And it's because, I had the conviction and the belief, but I paired up with misaligned investors that didn't have that same conviction and belief. They forced a change, and then it became a very painful scenario. Extremely valuable lessons and learning. Like I wouldn't trade that for anything. But it's just an example of, it's one way of thinking. It's not the right way of thinking. It's just where I've defaulted. But I would say too that it comes with a lot of challenges. Being early, people always say that, like if being early and wrong often feels like the same thing, and the pain feels the same. So you got to have a lot of conviction and belief, and also have a lot of ability to wait, or I wouldn't say wait. You got to have staying power, basically, because it's very lonely when it's cold outside and the winds are raging, and it gets really quiet and there's these pullbacks in the market, and you're the only one that believes in a thing. You better have a lot of conviction, and if you do and you're right, it can really pay off. But it's also just I'm very realistic of how challenging those like frontier type things are, and we chuckle about this, but we've got the most powerful nation in the world that's announced their favor for Bitcoin. And if we even thought of those things back in 2017, like I remember specifically being on stage saying that Bitcoin is going to 100K, and I got eviscerated. Just and that was like forever ago. So like that was a long time of getting beat up over these things, and it makes you kind of question, am I right? Am I wrong? But I think all frontier technologies take time, and it's the time, and I guess like how you earn your stripes as a founder is if you can make it through that time with unwavering belief, because it's not easy at all.
Yeah, the adage is you've got to be contrarian and right.
Mm-hmm.
And often it takes a really long time for that to play out. And I really love that answer for a lot of reasons, because it mirrors exactly what we're working on and what I'm working on. So in some way that was very therapeutic for me just to hear you say that again. Because we're doing something where, we know that things like demand response are a cost lowering mechanism for energy users. And so I thought, similar to you, like there's got to be a way that this works. There's no like template out there for how do you lower energy costs for a region. But if this does it on a small scale, then if we get it to the right scale and do it in the right place, we can actually have a huge energy impact on a region and lower the cost of living for people. And thought, okay, this is a beautiful idea. This should work. Everything maths out. And I've had, to your point about finding aligned capital, a lot of potential capital not get it, or even say that's not possible. Like there's no real way that works out. And at first that can be really saddening that people don't see your vision and get it. And when you have conversations with other founders, especially ones who've been successful and built something, you realize that can actually be your most powerful signal on the long run, is that if 99 out of 100 people don't get it, then you actually could have the most upside because you found something that's not only little known or poorly understood, but even when you explain it very clearly, is rejected. And those have been some of the most transformative things that have shown up in the world of entrepreneurship, technology, great companies that change the whole landscape.
Yeah, I think that's a really good example of exactly what we're talking about, right? Because demand response was not a conversation in 2017 with miners, right? Like it wasn't a conversation until I would say like quite recently. And a lot of people don't understand it. Like I wouldn't say I'm an expert in it, but it's definitely a thing. There's billions of dollars in Texas that think that it's quite useful. Some people won't get it. And the challenge for you is having conviction in that, knowing it works, having a really good feeling of knowledge and belief that this is going to be impactful, and the staying power and ability to keep that upright until the gears connect and it, becomes a see, it's obvious in retrospect kind of thing. But I think that's one of those examples where you're in the messy middle. You can see the impact that it can have down from like energy and how people are paying for it and using it in their daily lives. There are some good examples, but it's not yet mainstream knowledge enough that makes the average investor that would look at you say, okay, I get that. That can be a direct supporter of my thesis in investing in you. Let's go. So it's kind of early on that concept. But I think the implications of it are very cool, of how that can play out. Because again, how many times in history has there been this kind of similar functionality for an industry like Bitcoin mining that can do this thing, right? So I think it's a huge value add part of your overall kind of value prop as a business, I think. Hard to wrap your head around for some people because it's fairly net new in the grand scheme, but it's a good example of one of those things that you know it, you see it, you've got belief in it, and sometimes it's the time between forming that thesis and then when it becomes obvious that you're in that messy middle. It sounds like
It's what makes it so exciting, and to what you said earlier, so challenging, is that knowing that there is that potential and that you could be right and you could be right big is the most exciting place to be and the most exciting kind of thing to be working on, because once something is broadly understood, it's no longer that interesting, and probably a lot of the opportunity has been eroded. So
yeah,
as frustrating as it can be for people to not get it all around you, that's kind of like your signal that you're working on the right thing, that there is still some opportunity there.
The best thing in the world, especially when you're on the frontier, is like you got to keep your eyes and ears open to find out that first, whether it's you or someone else, that first mover that's done the thing that you're talking about, to say, aha, there's an example, like that validated proof point you can point to that's external from yourself. So it's not just you saying it. You can say, that's an example. And sometimes it waits for that. Like an example in like tokenization back in the day was waiting until the St. Regis Aspen Resort was tokenized to say, oh, see, real people are doing this. And then, there was that moment of, Bitcoin being added to index funds and creating, ETFs out of it. And then there's the treasury stuff. I think where you're at, it's a similar thing where, it's something that just needs to be kind of documented, shown, and packaged, because looking back, Canada's just kind of known for our junior venture markets and all that. But if you can remember, some of the early miners were not the best miners. And if you look at some of the miners that went absolute bonkers, it's not based on pure merits of the value, scopes, and scale and quality of their mining operation. It was, they were the first mover. So once the market knows it, likes it, it can move fast. And, being there is an important part. And we know that the first ones weren't, the most successful or longest standing, but they got that first kind of bump. And I think for you, it's one of those things that once it clicks, it clicks. We never thought we'd be sitting here where we're at, where, presidents are speaking about it and holding it and all that kind of good stuff. But in the same way, are we going, this is maybe even posing a question to you. Do you have conviction and belief that at a certain point, you know, states, municipalities, and government and utility providers is just going to be part of their overall composition? Because if that's the case, it becomes of, do you have the waiting time because it's arbitrage against inevitability, right?
I think this fits well with the analogy of electricity in general. Is that at some point, very early on, electricity was early stage tech, and it was very scary, and people thought that there were demons in the wires, and not that many people were using it. But there were power users that were very interested, and it took a long time for it to be nowadays, the most boring industry that you could possibly hope to get into is the electrical utility industry. I mean, it's very profitable because it's essentially like a regulated monopoly in most cases, but it's not an exciting, forward thinking, as a whole. There's very exciting things going on in energy broadly, but as an electric utility, it really is just a run of the mill utility that people accept as part of everyday life now. But at one point, it was very interesting and very controversial, and it took years, decades, for it to not be and for it to be widely used. And it just feels like that's what we're in. At some point, Bitcoin becomes nothing more than the financial system that everybody's most comfortable with, and it's like swimming in water. You don't know any different until you get out. And at some point, Bitcoin becomes that water. At some point, Bitcoin mining is just accepted as, yeah, that's our load balancing resource. What are you talking about? Why don't you have that?
Mm-hmm.
But right now, it's still new. It's still a foreign concept to most people, even deeply familiar with energy dynamics. So again, that's the opportunity. It's the opportunity not just to build it, but to educate, because it is still new and poorly understood. But one day it will become a boring business, and we'll have to find some other frontier to be on the front of.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's the wild thing, right? Is I find it very interesting because you look at these, like you said, like some could be monopolies. It's all, government and utilities. But you look at these big, energy companies, it's kind of like a legacy industrial business. They don't often or quickly pair up to energy intensive, technologically advanced industry incredibly quickly. Like it takes some time. It's not a natural marriage made in heaven. I mean, in some ways it is from providing it, but I mean, at the end of the day, it's going to take a bit of time for those two to amalgamate. But like you said, it's going to become something that just kind of goes together, like the two that use each other and how this whole balancing thing works. It's going to make sense. And I think that's part of the whole thesis. So you look at, Bitcoin is money, Bitcoin is a network, this global, superpower that it is. I mean, it's also the same way you look at intelligence. As cautious as it is in some ways, you got this, intelligence that's going to be so helpful to so many people in so many ways. It's going to impact all these industries, but we're staring down the barrel of saying like these two impervious things, Bitcoin being money and AI being intelligence, that's going to affect every worker in every industry. They both go down to manufacturing and chips and metal and power and infrastructure. And they're not going away, right? So how do you solve for and how do you optimize and how do you remain on the leading edge of provisioning that is constantly a question, and why you guys are doing what you're doing and set up to do a lot more. They're not going to go away. And I think that's the thing I always fall back to is like, these are challenging, highly, highly ultra competitive industries. They're not going anywhere. So you got to be pretty, on the leading edge of value and differentiation to make sure that your business is sustainable. But, it's not going anywhere. Bitcoin's not going anywhere. And, they both require fundamental things to work. The trick and the challenge for founders and people building businesses around it is how can you create value in, that supportive stuff to further enable and or do things with them. Therein lies the opportunity. And that's always changing. It's always advancing, but it's still needed.
I love it. As we come to a close, what are you most excited about in the near future, personally and then broadly? And then please give people where they can follow you, where they can keep up with what you're working on, and get in touch if they want to, if you want such a thing.
Personally, Summer, getting on a boat with my little one. That's always my favorite thing. From the business side, I think it's because I'm in the middle of it, but I'm very, very curious to see how a number of things play out for businesses. And I'm not just getting adoption with AI in general, but I would say that kind of second phase, that pragmatic adoption of like, okay, at the beginning, it's like everybody knows and says you need it, but then it comes down to that stark reality of for what and how, which is the hard part. So there's a lot of shifts happening in that world that make it easier, but also, competitive and different. So I'm very curious to see how that plays out. And I'm ever curious how things are going to play out from the the tariff and political stuff. I'm in Canada where I'm not a huge fan of our lovely situations up here, but we got elections and we got a lot of stuff playing out. So I'm cautiously optimistic and happy to see that, hey, things are kind of messy and weird for a lot of people right now, and same with me. And I'm just curious to see how all this stuff plays out in the next little bit, because for people like you and I and so many other people that are building companies, building businesses require a little bit of a line of sight for political and markets, and to kind of support this kind of venture ecosystem, public markets ecosystem. And a lot of investors in the past little bit have kind of been waiting, like, how is XYZ going to play out? And so it's kind of put a little bit of a stall on things. I'm hearing that a lot from a lot of people, and I'm looking forward to just seeing how the next little bit here plays out, so that builders can continue to build. And I'm very curious to see what changes with energy and Bitcoin and with AI and with infrastructure and compute in general, because it's going to be an interesting couple of years. I know that.
Totally agree. And same. It's going to be a wild ride. If we thought that this year has been unpredictable so far from the lens of a couple years ago, can't even imagine what's coming down the pike.
Yeah, that's for sure. What are you most excited about personally and at Abundant?
Ooh, personally, I would agree with you. I'm really excited for warmer weather and getting out and just walking in the woods. That is definitely my happy place, my decompression spot. It's so much easier to uh, have the excuse of needing to be in front of the computer
Oh yeah.
much longer if there's nothing to do outside. And if there's a trail on a sunny day, I'm probably outside with the dog. With us, with Abundant Minds, I'm really excited that we're growing into an environment that wants us to grow now. Instead of wondering if around the corner there's an administration that wants to find a sly way to obsolete us or take us out of existence or find a way to make it very challenging to run a business. So just being in an environment where there's support and there's people in the highest offices, not only in support of the technology, but working in companies within Bitcoin and mining and setting up all these interesting initiatives. Love or hate all the rest of the policies, that one segment of this little world of ours, I'm very happy to see supported. And so that is what I'm excited for. And it's just opening up a lot of opportunity to us and showing much of the world that previously was very skeptical and very hesitant to get any kind of exposure to this. You're seeing a lot of people who previously would have been, hell no, I'm never going to allocate to this, start to open their mind a little bit and dip their toe in. And in a lot of cases, completely bypass the Bitcoin rabbit hole to get to the mining rabbit hole and actually start with the mining rabbit hole, which was not something that I personally expected, but is very, very cool to see. So I'm optimistic that we can leapfrog all the financial education needed to get someone to understand the technology and still get them to understand the energy and what we can do to impact the physical world with it.
Love it. That makes sense. Some work in front, but I think it's gonna become more and more clear as you move forward, for sure. And you're based in not only a beautiful spot, but a supportive country. Unlike some spots like British Columbia that say hard no to Bitcoin mining, and other provinces in Canada. So you've got a lot of things going there, and I think this is a chance where it's made evident that people that are countries and states that are forward thinking like yours are gonna be able to foster the innovation and things that you're able to do to make some pretty cool things happen, where there are some places like where I'm sitting that stifle that, unfortunately. So I'm glad you got room to run there.
We just got to keep having open conversations. I'll make some drives up if we can get in the right rooms and talk to people.
Yeah, we'll make some changes. That'd be good.
Dean, I really appreciate you taking the time, not just for the podcast, but I've really enjoyed to get to know you over the last year and can't wait to keep building with you. I consider you a really good friend at this point, and it's been invaluable to have you in my corner, helping me not make some of the same mistakes that you've seen people make over and over again. And just really gives me a lot of confidence and hope for what we're building. So just want to say thank you and that I'm super excited to get to work with you and appreciate you sharing yourself with the audience.
Awesome, man. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me on. I've really enjoyed watching how much you've grown over the past year and all the things that you've done. So I'm looking forward to what comes next for sure. It's going to be fun.
Appreciate you, brother.
All right.
Until next time.
Thanks.